Well, it's the best day of the week. It's Friday. It's Mailbag Day here on the Morning Pit on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You know I love Mailbag Day. It's the day you guys ask questions. It's the day that I don't have to plan out a topic like what are 5 sure things on the Pitt football roster this season. I let you guys pick the topics and pick the discussion points, and then we talk about them here for a little while on the Morning Pit. I always look forward to it. We got some great questions this week on the football side and on the basketball side. Transfer stuff, ACC stuff, NIL stuff, football team stuff, basketball team stuff, all kinds of topics covered. You guys did a great job coming through with the questions. So let's jump into it here on the mailbag. No. I mean, I could call it the mailbag edition of the Morning Pit. I'm going to call it the Morning Pit Mailbag here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. The Morning Pit Mailbag. I like that name much better, and it's a Friday here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com where it's time for the Morning Pit Mailbag. This is what we do here every Friday, unless that Friday happens to be the day after the ACC tournament quarterfinals and the morning of Pitt's appearance in the ACC tournament semifinals, in which case we will just talk about basketball. But since that was last week and not this week, and there's no ACC tournament to speak of, there's no NCAA tournament to speak of. I mean, there is an NCAA tournament, but not exactly one we're going to Not exactly one we're going to speak of. Shout out to Duquesne, though. Credit to the Dukes beating BYU yesterday. The 11-6 upset. I didn't have that one on my bracket. I don't know if you picked Duquesne to win that game. I just sort of I picked BYU to move forward. Not very far, but certainly past this game, I think. Well, that's a double check my bracket. Did I pick Duquesne just for fun? Probably not. But shout out to the Dukes. They advance. Good for them. And then, of course, so we're all watching the NCAA tournament, but there's no Pitt-related topics to discuss as far as that goes. There's basketball stuff to talk about, but not NCAA tournament-related. So we'll just watch the games, and we'll talk about Pitt stuff here on the Morning Pit. You know what we always ask you to do? Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Subscriber numbers going up. I appreciate you guys. We're getting closer and closer to 4,000. I'm really excited about that. I'd love to get us to 4,000 subscribers here on YouTube. So do me a favor and just hit the subscribe button if you have not. Even though we have more subscribers than views on most videos, there's still like a significant percentage of people who watch these videos who are not subscribers. So let's make it balance out just a little bit more. And if you're watching the video, click that subscribe button. It's right down there. It won't cost you anything. It doesn't require you to do anything. It doesn't obligate you to do anything. It just makes me feel better. And same thing with liking the video. Makes me feel better as well. You know the website, Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. That's where we get all the questions for the mailbag edition of the Morning Pit. On the Between Fifth and Forbes message board is where we start a thread each week. People post their questions, and we answer as many as we can right here on the Friday edition of the Morning Pit during the mailbag. And so it's always fun to do that. It's fun to get those questions. And, of course, Panther-Lair.com, we have the message boards where you can interact with other Pitt fans all day, every day. We have, coverage, all kinds of coverage of Pitt football, basketball, recruiting, all of those things. I mean, we have everything you can need as a Pitt fan. It's right there. Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Do you get it? I hope so. Let's jump into the questions. And I love these questions right off the bat. DuBois Panther says, Chris, much credit to the strength and conditioning staff for basketball. Impressive that Jalen Lowe and Bub Carrington never hit the freshman wall and continue to play the majority of minutes all year. Have they had the same staff under Capel? This is a good question. I had to do a little bit of research. I had forgotten sort of the origin story of Pitt's strength and conditioning staff on the basketball side. Kevin Stallings came in and brought along Gary Christopher, who had been his strength and conditioning coach at Vanderbilt. Brought in Christopher, and Gary Christopher, who, he's a man with 2 first names. I can't speak to whether or not you should trust him, though he does have 2 first names, but his last name, which is a first name, is a great first name. But I digress. If you find photos of the guy, he was jacked. I mean, the dude was huge. He was a workout monster. Stallings brought him from Vanderbilt. He was here for Stallings 2 years at Pitt. And then Jeff Capel retained him when he was hired prior to the 2018-19 season. And Christopher stayed with Capel for 4 years. Vincent Williams was hired in the summer of 2022 to replace Christopher. Christopher left to go to TCU. I don't know if time is a flat circle, but college basketball is. It's everything's sort of connected. And if you want to really go down the rabbit hole, you can look up some of the news that surrounded Gary Christopher's hiring at Pitt, because there had been a long-time strength and conditioning coach for the basketball program, a guy by the name of Tim Beltz, who was let go when Stallings was hired, and I don't want to say relegated, but put on just women's basketball and stayed there for about a year, and then was let go by the university and took a bit of umbrage with that decision and filed a lawsuit. I actually needed to look up and find out what came of that lawsuit, but there were a lot of, I mean, not to get too far sidetracked here because it's a great question that I actually want to talk about. There were a lot of interesting personnel things 2017, 2018, 2019, probably around there. The early years of the Heather Lyke administration at Pitt. And I know there was a lot of house cleaning done with head coaches, but there were a lot of peripheral figures, longtime peripheral figures. You know, you would say in the background, but they had a significant enough impact that it feels like you're diminishing the impact they had by saying in the background, who were let go along the way. And there were some ruffled feathers. Let's just say that. So you can look up the Tim Beltz lawsuit. I actually meant to look that up and find out what actually came of it. But let's get back to the question at hand from Du Bois Panther. Gary Christopher was here for the first 4 years. Vincent Williams, the last 2 seasons, has been the strength coach. And I think the basis of your question, I think is a pretty good one, and probably one we haven't talked about enough. I mean, you had a handful of guys play a ton of minutes. And Jalen Lowe's big minutes really didn't start until about halfway through the season. Bub Carrington played big minutes all season long. Blake Hinson played big minutes all season long. Once he moved into that role, Jalen Lowe played big minutes all season long. And Ishmael Leggett was on the court a lot. And yet, I wouldn't say by the end of the year that they showed like dead legs or anything like that. You know, I mean, Blake Hinson went cold against North Carolina, but I wouldn't say it's because he was tired. I mean, he could speak to that better than I could, but I didn't think it. I mean, it wasn't leaving all of his 3-point shots on the front of the rim, or some of those other kind of telltale signs. I thought he was a little bit slow getting up and down the court, but I think there are a lot of factors, and I say that, but then he scored a pretty big fast break play for an and one with about 6 minutes left to go that made it a 3-point game. It was 60-54. Remember, Bub Carrington got a steal and threw it like diagonal, almost full court, and Hinson got it and ran in and put it up for a layup and got a foul and converted the and one. And so that was with 6 minutes to play, near the end of that game, when he played 40 minutes in that game, and he still seemed to be able to run pretty well. So I would say, conditioning-wise, strength-wise, I thought this team held up pretty well. There's always going to be strength questions about the centers, but conditioning-wise, I mean, these guys played a lot over the course of 33 games, and I thought they acquitted themselves nicely. And I think that's a credit to the strength and conditioning staff. I talked a lot throughout the season about, these guys can't keep playing these minutes. You just can't play all 3 guards together because you can't have guys playing 36 minutes a night. Well, they ended up playing 36 minutes a night, for the better part of February and March, and they were still going strong by the end. So shout out to Vincent Williams and the rest of Pitt's strength and conditioning staff, for their work this season. Atwood 409 asks about the Caden Proctor situation at Iowa and whether that, leads to the schools or the government doing something about NIL. And the Caden Proctor situation, if you haven't followed this, is wild. He's a guy who was committed to Iowa for a long time. Alabama swooped in kind of late in the recruiting process and stole Proctor away. He ended up starting like every game at left tackle this past season as a true freshman. Went into the transfer portal, as a lot of Alabama guys did when Nick Saban retired, and transferred to Iowa. He was home. He was excited. He was glad to be home. And he's been there, he started the spring semester, started spring camp. And then this week announced he was transferring again. He's going back to Alabama. That's a first. We've seen some wild things in the transfer portal. There's no question about it. Remember like 2 years ago when we naively thought that Jordan Addison transferring after winning the Biletnikoff Award at Pitt was the craziest thing we could have imagined out of the transfer portal? No, it keeps getting wilder and wilder, and it keeps getting weirder. and weirder. And like, are the schools going to be moved to action? Is the government going to be moved to action? I don't know. Like, all I know when I look at this Caden Proctor situation or any transfer situation is the same thing I've said for a long time. There needs to be a structure to it. There needs to be regulation. Regulation is a dirty word in this country sometimes, but the reality is it's usually pretty good to have regulation, because if you don't, things get completely crazy. Like you could go in a lot of tangents about the value of regulation, but let's just keep the focus on college sports right now. Some sort of regulation, some sort of structure, something that doesn't necessarily restrict movement, but makes things at least somewhat feasible as a real structured thing. Something organizational, so you don't have this where you transfer in December, you go to a school for 2 months, and then you transfer again and go back to the school that you left. Yes, everybody's free to move. Everybody, who was it? Whatever coach from East Carolina or someplace, who left 1 week into spring camp or so. I know, I get it. And you know what? There should be a little bit of structure restricting the movement of coaches as well. Things called contracts. But I don't have the solution to the transfer portal and how it's impacting college sports right now. I don't have the solution, but I'm also not paid to have the solution. I'm not smart enough to have the solution. No one's counting on me to have the solution. But what I can tell you is that the solution involves some sort of structure. It involves some amount of transparency, and it involves a hefty dose of regulation. That's what it needs. Because all the claims about it being the wild, wild west, that's exactly what it is. It's completely unhinged. There are no, safeguards for either party, because this isn't just, the players benefiting here. They are at risk in certain, I think they have certain exposures and vulnerabilities in this current system, if you can even call it that. It's not a system. It's completely unstructured and completely unregulated, and it needs to, that's what they need, is structure, regulation, and transparency. How you fix a situation like Caden Proctor, I don't know. I don't have that solution, other than to say that some sort of structured system has to be put into place. And it's going to be very different from the college sports that we've come to know. We're already in a very different form of college sports than what we all grew up with watching, or what we all watched as recently as 7 years ago, 5 years ago. And so whatever comes next will also be likewise very, very different from what we've all come to know, but at least it'll have some element of stability, something more stability than the current system has, which, again, can we even call it a system? Bergby asks, given the Nate Temple injury, do you expect Pitt to try to add a defensive end from the portal this summer? Looking pretty thin there, especially in terms of experience for a defensive scheme that relies on a strong pass rush. Any other positions you think they might or should try to bolster via transfer before the fall? I think there are things that they could try to do. I think they could try to get another defensive lineman. And I say lineman because, we're talking about defensive end in the wake of Nate Temple's injury, but the reality is we all thought they needed another defensive tackle anyway. So now you're looking at a tackle, an end. I'm sure the coaches wouldn't mind getting another experienced corner, although I'm sort of the mind that you rip the Band-Aid off, go with the youth, and by youth, I mean inexperienced guys. They're third and fourth year players there who just haven't played very much because of all the veteran corners ahead of them. I think you just go with that there. But so I think there's a handful of spots that the coaches would like to add. I'm sure they'd like another offensive lineman, because who wouldn't want a veteran offensive lineman? But the reality is they need 5, 6, 7 scholarship spots to open just to fit the guys they currently have under the 85-man scholarship limit. And anything additional, you're going to need more guys to leave. So to me, unless there's a mass exodus of 10 scholarship players after spring camp, which is possible, I can't rule that out, or the NCAA lifts the 85-man scholarship limit and either raises it or does away with it altogether, to me, I don't think you see much more than one addition over the summer. The defensive line would be the spot I would target. Excuse me, but probably more tackle than end. I think they have greater needs there. Although losing Nate Temple, you lose a lot of experience for sure. Skater Pitt asks, in your limited open time at spring practices so far, is there anything that has really stood out about the new offensive coaches? Pat Narduzzi had interesting growing pains comments this week, so I'm curious on what you're hearing for the early returns on the new offensive staff. I think the most interesting thing about the new offensive staff, and it's what we've seen, but it's also what we've kind of heard about, coaches have talked about this, players have talked about this, is the speed with which they're practicing. And that's not just, I know as soon as I said that, you were like, oh God, I'm so tired of hearing about the tempo. Guys, shut up about the tempo. It's not just the tempo. It's the approach to practice overall. And I think some of this is what we see a little bit during the open media window. Some of it is what happens during like live periods and team periods when you're running plays, offense versus defense, either in a 7-on-7 setting or an 11-on-11 setting. And it's not just that they're snapping the ball quickly, it's that they're moving through practice quickly. They're probably getting more plays in because rather than run a play and stop and talk about it, they're getting right back up and running another play. I forget if it was either Lindsey Lamar or J.J. Laster, either the new running backs coach or the new wide receivers coach said, we're coaching during practice, we're teaching, but we're not spending a whole lot of time on that. We're just running plays. We get into the team drills, team periods, we're play, run. And then we'll get back and we'll go over the film and we'll break it down and we'll really do the teaching there. And I thought that was interesting. It's a different approach. Practices didn't move very fast, on the offensive side in the past. I thought it was interesting that that's sort of how they're going about it. And I think that makes sense. I think you've got to get guys' brains wired to go fast like that. I mean, it's one thing to say we're going to snap the ball every 10 seconds or whatever it is. We're going to snap the ball this fast. We're going to go. You got to get up and go. And even Branson Taylor said to us yesterday that he's still kind of getting used to it. He's still getting accustomed to like, the play ends, you don't look up at the video board and watch the replay. You get back on the ball. You get back on the line of scrimmage and get ready to go. And I think there are habits like that you have to break. And if you're pausing to teach, if you're pausing to break down little details in the middle of the drill, you're not breaking the habits you need to break. And so I thought that was interesting. I think that's interesting. And I think I understand it. I think that's how you have to move. You don't want to build bad habits through bad practices and bad reps and bad drills, but you need to have that speed be second nature for these offensive guys. And then you go back and you teach the finer details and points during film. Eastender 2 says, when a player enters the portal, how much support do they continue to get from Pitt, like tutors and such? I would think, I don't know for a fact. I would have to ask, a few people for official input on this, but I would think when a guy enters the portal in late November, he's still on scholarship. He's still going to finish the semester. He's still going to take his finals. And I would think he would still have access to the various academic support services that you would need at that point in the academic calendar. So I don't think when you go into the portal they sort of excommunicate you. Maybe some guys, but I think if there's still time left in the semester, I think they help you get through that semester. I mean, it's in Pitt's best interest to help you get through that semester and do well in your finals. Potter County native says, how will the minutes at center and hoops be distributed next year, especially if your prediction of Feddy entering the portal pans out? The variable of Will Jeffers going or staying may have to play in with the below gentlemen. Guillermo, Jorge, Papa, Amni, Najai, and a transfer. So as Potter County native alluded to or mentioned, I think there's a distinct possibility that Federiko goes into the transfer portal this offseason. We'll see. Record scratch. Hi. It's me, Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com, jumping in and interrupting myself because, as you can tell, I recorded that portion you were just watching earlier in the day on Thursday. And later on the day on Thursday, it became official. Well, more or less official. Federiko going into the transfer portal. He's going to leave. We said a couple days ago on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com that we thought there was a pretty good possibility of that happening on Thursday night. Last night, Federiko confirmed himself that he is going into the transfer portal. I don't know if the full paperwork is done and it's official yet, but it will be soon enough. He's leaving. I think there's probably a few things behind that. from what I've heard, I think there are people around him who are sort of influencing him on leaving, that he could be used in a different way, or he could find a better role, or this or that. I mean, whatever. Via con Dios. Good luck to you, Federico. I think he was a serviceable player. I think he could have a role here. I think he had a role here. But obviously he wasn't a huge impact player offensively. Defensively, I thought he was more inconsistent this season than he was last year. He still provided rim protection, averaged more than a block per game, although less than he averaged last season. But nevertheless, he's gone. And so this question of minutes distribution at center, you're really looking at, Guillermo Diaz-Graham obviously coming back. Papa Conti, I think, as an option there, although I don't, neither one of those guys is the perfect option of what I think you really want, which is a post-up center, a guy you're going to feed the ball to and let him make a move down low and try to work to the basket. At best, with Guillermo Diaz-Graham, you're going to get some pick and rolls on occasion. More or less, you're going to get what you got out of Federico inside the arc, and then you're going to get some shooting from outside. I think Guillermo scored, about 190 points from the floor. He had another 30 or so from the free throw line this past season, and out of his 190, I think about 96 of those came off of three-pointers. And so, like, half his production, basically, came from beyond the arc this past season, and that's who he is. That's the kind of player he is, and that's the kind of player he's going to be. I don't think he's going to develop that kind of post-up game that I think you're looking for, and I'm not sure Papa Conti is really going to provide that either. I think he's going to, Papa Conti's impact is going to be more defense, more rebounding than offense, and I think his offensive limitations are different from Federico's, but his contributions, in terms of total production, might end up being about the same, at least offensively. So I don't know if that's an option there. I don't know if there's a solution there if we're talking about trying to find a better offensive weapon. I'm not sure that there's a solution there. So it's probably going to have to come from the transfer portal. There's just a question of who you're going to get out of the portal, what you're going to have available to get them out of the portal. I mean, look, the priorities right now are the guards. I mean, getting Bub Carrington back, Jalen Lowe back, and Ishmael Leggett back. You have to get those three guys to return. That's the number one priority with NIL and everything this offseason. And then whatever you have left, you work to try to fill Blake Hinson's spot. And you probably, try to get a center. I just don't know if the budget's going to be there for a big-time impact center. Jim and I talked about this on Wednesday night on the live stream. I'm just not sure that they're going to have the NIL funds available to get somebody who can really make an impact, in that way. So it really just comes down to, what you feel like, for the Pitt coaches, what they feel like they need to fill out the rotation with Guillermo Diaz-Graham and Papa Conti. My guess right now is that Guillermo is your starting center next season, assuming they get a good 4 out of the portal. And even if they don't, I think Zach Austin could start there. Jorge's an option on the wing. They could start 3 guards plus Austin and somebody else. It depends. On the options they have available, but I'm guessing that's probably who you're going to end up with as the starter. Is Guillermo Diaz-Graham, Papa Conti behind him, and then a transfer, depending on the caliber of transfer and the quality of the transfer, fitting in somewhere in there. So, interrupting myself here to update that a little bit, give you a more timely response to a very good question. Let's return now to your regularly scheduled program in the Morning Pitt Mailbag here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Some good questions, and we're kind of almost out of our 20-minute period here. You know what? I'll tell you what. A.S. Daniels and SV Pig 1 and Hoya Panther and Special Sauce, you guys have great questions. I want to give those questions the amount of time they deserve, so we'll save those and we'll get them on next week's mailbag. All right, we're at that 20-minute mark. That's generally where we like to be. I feel like your attention span starts to wane at 20 minutes, or maybe just mine. But I want to give those questions some real, some thought, and extended answers. So we're going to save those next week. We already got a jump start on next week's mailbag questions, but if you want to be part of the mailbag next week, go to Panther-Lair.com, go to the Between Fifth and Forbes message board, look for the mailbag post. It'll go up on Tuesday or Wednesday, and put your question in there. We'll answer as many as we can for the mailbag. In the meantime, like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you don't miss any of our Pitt video content. And, of course, check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Thanks, everybody, for all the great questions this week. We really appreciate it. I hope you've enjoyed watching the videos this week. I appreciate you watching them as much as possible. And that's it. I hope you had a great week. I hope you have a great Friday, a great weekend. And we will catch up with you on Monday morning for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.